Well, welcome. This is the first class of a series of four called Living Outside the Box. So, what does living outside the box mean? I was recalling a very old story from the time of Plato, and you might be familiar with Plato's cave, where the people are living in this cave and they're chained to it, and they see shadows from something up above, but they don't know what it is, but they don't really want to go up there because they're afraid of what it might be. But actually, it's the real world that's up there, and they're just so used to being in limitation. And a more contemporary story along the same lines that you might be familiar with is called Flatland. So, any of you ever read that? If you haven't, it's a wonderful little book. It's about this two-dimensional world. So, there's squares, there's triangles, there's circles, and they can move around in a plane, but that's what they know. And then one day a three-dimensional being steps through their world. So what do they see? So when their legs would go through, they'd see a little circle here and one over here that would get bigger and smaller, and then the circles would disappear and they would reappear over here. So they started to invent all sorts of theories about what this was about. And some wise person in Flatland finally figured out, well, there must be some higher dimensionality, and that's what these beings are. So that's kind of like our situation. Scientists not too long ago have actually proven that there's no way to distinguish between our four-dimensional world being like what we know it is, 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time, versus a holographic projection of a 5-dimensional world. It's impossible to tell the difference. So we might be living in a holographic projection of a higher reality, and there's no way that we could know that. And scientists are now postulating with string theory that there may be 10 or 11 different dimensions. And we go, well, where's the rest of them? I don't see them. Well, they say these other ones are very tiny and they're curled up with inside the dimensions that we know of, but they are a reality. But we are so ingrained with our frame of reference, and this is the box. We're talking about living outside the box, that we don't usually conceive of that there might be a deeper aspect of reality that we know nothing about. And we take as fundamental truths our assumptions. And what are our assumptions? Well, one very deeply ingrained assumption is what is real is what I can perceive with my senses. If I can't perceive it, or scientists might say, well, if I can't find a way of measuring it, then it's not real. Because, we're aware there's things very tiny we can't see with our eyes, but you can perceive them with an electron microscope. And same thing with astronomy. We're aware that there are ways to look at space through X-ray telescopes and infrared telescopes for things we can't see with the eyes, but we know, well, those are there. But there's pretty much an assumption that, well, that's what reality is. It has to be something that is measurable, or at least something, if there's a theory about it, it has to fit in with our accepted theories, which are taken as fundamental truths. So the laws of physics are assumed by many scientists to be immutable, unchangeable truths, that's just the way that things are. But now scientists are starting to question, well, maybe they're not the way that we think. They do apply very well in what we can measure in the world that we know about, but it's possible that things are different than this, that the world. So let me give you an example. There's a scientist that I'll be talking about another time named William Tiller, who has done really fascinating research on subtle energy. And he gave a presentation at a conference for physicists, and he was on a panel, and next to him was a traditional, well-respected physicist. And Tiller presented his research on subtle energy, which had results that don't fit in with the usual laws of physics, but they're replicable. There's a theory that's consistent with it. It's been validated many times over. And so the conventional physicist turns to Tiller after Tiller gave his presentation And he says, get this, even if what you say is true, I don't believe it. So we talk about religious fundamentalists and we, kind of mock them. Well, these people just are taking these things as truth, and we think, well, they're pretty ridiculous or they're so outdated. But there's such a thing as science fundamentalism, assumption, just materialism, and an assumption of that we can understand the world through a dualistic way of understanding and experiencing. Well, quantum physics has come along to show that's not the case. The experimenter is actually changing what's being measured. You can certainly do research, but you have to take into account the effect of the observer. And even now, realizing in some experiments, you have to take into effect the consciousness of the observer having an impact on what is being measured.
So I'll jump in here. So on the other side of it then, there's the individual, there's us. And how do we relate to everything out there? Well, we feel like that's the real stuff, and somehow we try to fit into that. And sometimes we don't do a very good job, we feel like. So we feel like that's our fault. That what we are, we need to keep trying, and it's so sad that people are far away from us. And then we haven't seen them for a long time. So there's separation of space, separation of time. And we're put in a difficult position. And then especially that we don't really have much to do with how the world is unfolding. That's got all of its little magic, some of the things he was talking about here, but things we don't really understand. So we are faced with this internal self and conception of who we are. And sometimes, jumping ahead a little bit here, I think all of us have experienced meditation. We've experienced prayer in many cases. We've experienced ways of connecting with other beings in which we feel this much more connectedness. And something begins to happen in us. And one way we're talking about is the increase of light and moving light in different kinds of ways. So I'm going to read a poem to you right now that'll kind of focus more on that inner self and how we are connected. I call it Suspended Brilliance. A pauper in a house of riches, I lay down my name that defines me, any limiting concept of it at all, to unfold to you adequate reflective surface for your tried and true miracle of recreative magic, enfolding this moment within the full expanse of time, unfolding this life of a manifest being within the lives of all beings, unfolding anywhere within the boundary whence it emerged, now as one matchless beauty, of radiance upon radiance, held gleaming beyond definition, suspended brilliance. So, another way of seeing things. Go ahead.
So I want to, someone asked the Dalai Lama, everyone knows who the Dalai Lama is, well, what would happen if science proved that some of the fundamental beliefs of Buddhism were just invalid? And what he said, if scientific analysis were conclusively to demonstrate certain claims in Buddhism to be false, then we must accept the findings of science and abandon those claims. So here's the head of a major group of Buddhists saying that things that had been believed to be fundamental truths of Buddhism, perhaps even things that the Buddha said, it's possible that science could come along with a discovery that invalidates them. And instead of going, well, the Buddha's got to be right, he was enlightened, he says, well, no, we'd have to let go of these and realize that we'd have to change our assumptions and our belief system. Well, religions don't usually work this way, do they? I mean, they've got their established beliefs and writings which are taken to be the truth. In Christianity we say that's the gospel truth, and other religions would say this you can't question this. This is the word of God, or whatever term they want to use. And many of these things, the scriptures were attempts to communicate by beings who lived in a particular historical time, and they could only communicate an experience which is beyond words to start with, but they had to base the way they communicated in the understanding that was available to them, the consciousness of that time. So Buddha didn't know anything about quantum physics. Jesus presumably didn't know anything about quantum physics or chaos theory, or a perception of the universe. Pir Vilayat, who was our teacher in the Sufis for many, many years, said that the term God has just gotten so many connotations to it that he preferred just to use the term universe with a capital U, which means the totality of reality. And people could have different names of how they relate to that, what they call it, the transcendent, the divine, the beloved, and so on. But it's all talking about the same one fundamental reality. And the understanding that has emerged in current thinking is that we live in an evolutionary universe. We know about Darwin's theory of evolution, but the universe itself is evolving. Seth Lloyd, who is a computer scientist at MIT, had an article in Scientific American in which he postulated that the universe is a giant quantum computer. Well, that's pretty far out. And he raised the question, well, what's this quantum computer computing? And his answer was itself. Basically, it was trying to understand itself. So
I'm going to jump in too. Okay, I'm just thinking about Jesus right now and thinking about when you said, well, he didn't understand quantum physics. And there's one statement, and probably more than that, but one I remember is that he said, I and my Father are one. And many of us think, well, that means that Jesus was very special. He was the only Son of God, in the world. But Jesus, and you're shaking your head, and I totally agree, meant we are God. We are one with God in a special kind of way. And I don't know, he probably had a hard time explaining that, just like we would have a hard time explaining that. He said amazing, wonderful things, but to try to grasp the idea that somehow there's this connectiveness, that we really feed the divine on who we are. We feed the whole cycle of everything on who we are. And we have a uniqueness, and we speak a lot about uniqueness, that what you bring is your own flavor and many different flavors overlaid upon each other, that you are communicating to the rest of reality. And you're precious. And that's another thing. We don't realize how precious that we are and what it is that we are, the son, daughter of the divine. That's one way of thinking about it. We are an important element, an important being that shares beingness with so many. And it takes that turn right there of just knowing the value of that helps to actually make it happen, that it really is interrelating with everything else.
So back to this quantum computer seeking to understand itself, the Sufis say that God was a hidden treasure desiring to be known. So God created the universe so God could know him, herself, to love and be loved, to know and be known. Well, that's a different way of describing the same thing Seth Lloyd is saying, that the universe is seeking to understand itself. And we tend to anthropomorphize, as there's this giant quantum computer God that's thinking, I wonder who I am. No, it's an emergent property of reality that everything is organizing to a higher level of existence, a higher level of capacity for consciousness. So human beings have evolved to a higher state of consciousness than I will say most of the rest of the manifestation on the earth, but we really don't know about the minds of dolphins and elephants. For all we know, they've got consciousness further developed than ours. At least
unique, different way.
Okay. So we could say that we are part of the cutting edge of the way that the totality is capable of understanding itself through the input of each of the parts of that totality, which is, like Diane said, each of us is a unique part of that. Sometimes I like to think that each of us is a conscious node of a giant cosmic neural network, and you can call that God, you can call it the totality, you can call it the one reality beyond name and form. It doesn't matter what you call it, but our experiences are feeding into the understanding of the whole system. So even Arabi, who was a Sufi that lived hundreds of years ago, said a really profound thing. He said that every soul has access to a unique part of the divine wisdom that no other soul ever has had or can or will have access to. And that's a really amazing statement. So it's basically saying that each of us embodies a way of understanding of the totality that can't come from anything else. And we might first think about that like, okay, somehow there's this Akashic Records that has all the information for everything, and we have our part of that, we can plug into it and bring it back, like getting the book out of the reserve section of the library. But I don't believe that's the way that things are. I think that knowledge, that wisdom, is actually created, it's emergent as a result of our experiences and our relationship with whatever it is that we're experiencing.
Here's another way of saying the same thing. We become a resonating being who reflects in every way and connects in every way through the light in manifestation, and one returning light to the transcendent. So it's both comes one way and reflects back the other way.
Yes, and the light that returns is not like light on a mirror just bouncing back. That light is transformed. We are, if you're familiar with the term alchemy, each of us is continually participating in an alchemical operation of the universe upon itself. So we're a part of this totality that light comes into, and then through our experiences and what's gained through those experiences, that light is transformed and returned to the whole, and that effect not only transforms us, but it brings about a transformation of the possibilities of everything that it is, which means the universe has to be evolving, which means the old notions of religion, which are generally stuck in the 1600s, the time of Newtonian physics, a dualistic universe, a clockwork universe, a God that is separate from everything, that's all-knowing, and so on, that basically is unaffected by what goes on down here. That instead of that, we're all part of that one reality, and that reality, whatever we call it, has to be evolving, otherwise it would be dead. It would not be a living reality. So just as a good scientist would be open to questioning assumptions that have been taken as dogma, basically, although scientists don't call it that, they call it laws. But for some, it's really like a dogma. People on the cutting edge of different religions now and spiritual groups are questioning assumptions of even their own paths and traditions, that just because this was based on the understanding of the past doesn't mean that it doesn't evolve and change into the future. And like the Dalai Lama, they're open to saying, well, we need to maybe throw some of these things out. They're not valid. It was thought they were valid based on the understanding at a particular time. So the first step of living outside the box is realizing that we've been living inside of a box. And the box, there's a small box, which is our frame of reference, our history, our understanding, and so on, that we tend to we have built-in filters that tend to only let in things that are consistent with the way that we've known and understood. And anything outside of that, we tend to reject and go, well, that's just, I don't believe that, that's too far out, and so on. But collectively, we live in a box because the mass consciousness is that this is the way that things are. And there couldn't be something different. And when someone tries to postulate, well, there is a deeper reality, what happens to them? They're thought of as being nuts. They're ostracized by their peers. If you've read Thomas Kuhn, the Structure of Scientific Revolutions, talking about paradigm shifts, that at first when someone proposes a new paradigm, they're ridiculed. They're, if it's a scientist, they better have an independent source of funding because they're probably going to lose their regular job. They're not going to get any grants because people think they're nuts. But science is full of the history of people that propose things that maybe 30 years later everybody's going, of course this is true. But back when they proposed them, it was too different.
So we actually even, let's speak about our perception and our imagination. So they've said that when Columbus came to America, the Americas somewhere, that the people there could not even see the ships that were on the horizon because they had no concept of ships. They had canoes and things like that and people, but they couldn't even see what was on the horizon. And you probably played different games where someone bring a tray out and you look and see what you see on the tray, and you see in the world around you the things that you identify with, but so much is going on that we cannot perceive. That's one of the things when we go out in nature, when things catch our attention that hadn't before, we feel this amazing circulation within ourselves and oneness with things around us. But it's because we're living in the box. We're living in this old way of seeing everything. And our imaginations can be a big help in this business, but unfortunately we have to retune the imaginations too, because one of the main things we do with our imagination is imagine the same thing over and over again. Like we get up the next day and we do everything about the same way, and there's a comfort to that, but unfortunately it's sealing off a lot of the things that are going on in our world. That's one aspect of creativity. And also then if we look at our own lives, people that have kind of broken through and are getting outside the box, then we start doing things like art, appreciating other people's art, appreciating other people, seeing things, trying to go on trips to see what's going on in other places and starting to honor that. So sometimes we can break through in different ways like that.
And things that keep us in the box, well, what's the most popular search engine? Google, right? Well, you may not realize that as you continue to use Google, Google is going to filter, because there's, you click on, you put something in and it says there's like 1 million links to this. Well, you can't look at 1 million links. So what's the order that Google's going to give you? It's going to give you links that it has computed are similar to the kinds of things you've looked at before, which translates to you're going to see things, if it's about, let's say it's something controversial, you're going to see links to sites where people agree with what you've been looking at. So what happens? You think, well, I'm going to find out what's real about this. Well, the first 20 links I saw all are saying the same thing. So if you're a climate change denier, well, look, 20 links and someone's saying, here's this research that shows climate change is not real. Well, it's pretty reasonable that you would think, well, of course I'm right. Look at all these people that agree with me, and look at this research that agrees with me. But Google's not showing you things that don't agree with that, which might be the 97% of research that shows climate change is real. And so our perception is filtered by our ways of getting information. We would think, well, it's reasonable to base your understanding on the information that you get. Well, where do you get your information? In the past, you get it from what you were taught. You get it from what you've read in the past. You get it from what you read in the future. you get, unfortunately, as is the case too often, from social media, where again, Facebook is going to direct you to similar kinds of pages if people think the way that you think. And so you're going to assume that is reality because, I've done a thorough search and look what I found. Everybody agrees with me, or almost everybody agrees with what I'm thinking. These other people must be wrong. And those poor people, they're just stuck in something because someone told them something, but it can't be true because look what I've seen. So just as Google has its own filters, we constantly have filters in our ways of taking an input from the environment. Our brain is taking in millions of things every second. It can't possibly process all that consciously, so it filters out most of it that it considers to be unimportant. So there was an experiment done by Harvard. They made a video of, and it's on the internet, you can Google this, and it'll kind of spoil it when I tell you the thing, but I'll tell you what happened when I did this, and most people, it's a video of two groups of people. One group is bouncing a basketball. Let's say they all have white shirts on. They're bouncing it to the other people that have white shirts, and there's people in black shirts trying to get the ball and guarding them. And your task is, watch this for a minute and count how many times the ball is passed. And at the end it say, well, how many times did you see the ball being passed? 42, okay. Then it says, well, watch the video again and don't worry about counting the balls and see if there's anything else that maybe you didn't notice the first time. And you watch it again, and on the back side of the court, there's a man in a gorilla suit the whole time going back and forth like this. And I did not see it because my brain filtered that out. I'm looking for balls being bounced. Why would I expect this video from Harvard to have a man in a gorilla suit? That, the brain, that's totally ridiculous. And you don't see it. Most people don't see the gorilla until you're looking for it. So something right in front of our eyes we don't see. And so imagine how much we don't perceive, not just with the physical senses, but our concepts about the world, our assumptions about the way that the world is, and how deeply ingrained we are as individuals and collectively of being resistant to having those change. We just think, well, that it can't be a reality because, one example, one reason why we're asking people to wear masks to this class is that while COVID's getting better here, it's still pretty prevalent, and I've got several risk factors for it. So, both of us have been really careful. So now when we go places, we're usually the only people wearing masks. Well, when people go around and they see nobody wearing a mask, it's pretty easy to assume COVID is over. I don't have any risks. But in the past month or so, we've had so many friends that have gotten COVID, and in the past, even in the 2 years before, we hardly knew anyone personally who had COVID. We'd hear about other people. Now it's like all these people. So the numbers are way more, but because understandably people are tired of wearing masks, people are tired of hearing about it, and so on, that the general collective belief is it's really over. I don't need to do anything because, look, nobody else is, until they end up getting it. So that's kind of a current example of how our reality is conditioned by what we see around us, but that's not necessarily. Hello? Yeah, did you get the mask? That's not necessarily a valid way of understanding what's going on.
So I want to give you a taste of being outside the box for a minute.
If you could wear a mask, please.
Oh, thank you.
And what it feels like, because we've been in the box for quite a while now, about half an hour, thinking about the restrictiveness of our lives and the way that we see things. And in one way, getting out of the box means using our, understanding our own feelings for things and our own emotions and the importance of those things. Most of the time, we're just trying to get rid of the difficult situations and the pain that we have. And we want things to lighten up and feel better. And, when is the end of this kind of thing? Not knowing that that is actually part of the story of the universe, too. All the things that are difficult for us and what it is that we come up with in order to solve that, or find a new relationship that we never had, or find something. We are set in those difficulties for a very good reason. It's part of the evolution of this universe. So here's a poem about all this love. The love on both sides, and the love for our own being. We're talking about love for others. And so I wrote this about all this love, and it is born from a lot of my aching also. So I think you might feel that in there, and also see that this is perhaps a venturing outside the box. Oh, this aching is back again, this deep yearning yet unquenched. My love, I have sought you high and low for decades upon decades, found and then lost. And I'm speaking of the greater relationship of, you might call your beloved. You have turned me inside out. I have confessed to loving petty things. I've courted binges, vain intoxications, short-lived pleasures. Yet like the moon behind all reflections, you stream your untamed and undeniable glow. But does said moon face so sweetly shine without this my heart, a mirror divine? Yet doubting again, I feel the deepest of aches and tumble down again into the widest expanse, to that surface that requires the unbroken glance, the love beyond measure. And I remember we have been here before. We've been here, eternally enshrined in each heartbeat, now and then, now and forever now. How can it be that the greatest love requires to be connected to the smallest of all? When unmasked in the process of transformation, the aching behind all our pettiness, short-sightedness, and greed shows itself to be evidence of a love so profound that its only partner must be the brilliant, overwhelming, ever-flowing universe. Who did we think needed all this love anyway? Who did we think was all this love anyway? So it's not only the understanding and the brain thinking and putting it all together. It is our heart that is there, that is connecting and opening, and in great mystery most of the time. But hopefully we'll welcome these moments of being beyond the box.
So one thing that's important to understand about living outside the box and freeing ourselves from a previous basis of understanding is the way that significant change occurs, both in that sense, but also in life itself, is not linear. It's not continuous. It's, you could say, they're discontinuities. So the caterpillar doesn't instantly turn into a butterfly. It has to liquefy in the chrysalis, and then it turns into the butterfly. In chaos theory, in a chaotic system, you can't know from the initial conditions of how it's going to turn out. And so there's a process of self-organization, and if you look at it before it's completed, the process of getting to a higher state of equilibrium, it looks just like this confusing mess. So in religion, terms for this have been like the dark night of the mind, the dark night of the soul. But in the process, the Sufis have some terms. Fana is one, F-A-N-A, which the traditional meaning is annihilation. But I prefer to think of it as a letting go and a release of a previous state of being, so that something can emerge from it that's a higher order of being, but there has to be an in-between state in which you can't know what's going to come from it. And so you can, human nature is to recoil from that and try to latch on to the previous state of understanding and the previous things that worked for you in life, which could have to do with religion, beliefs about the world and so on, but they don't work anymore. And so there's this questioning. But if you discover that, okay, I'm going to trust that there is something that's going to make much more sense to me, and I can't perceive it from the current state of affairs. So I'm going to allow myself to go through this in-between state, which may last a while, and feel just like the caterpillar in the chrysalis. Okay, something is being reformed in me. I'm going to get into a state where I'm now capable of understanding things on a much deeper level than what was possible before. So I would ask each of you to think about your life experiences and to think about the discontinuities which could have been brought about by a serious illness, a loss of a loved one, some traumatic event, maybe some really good event, but it was challenging. You got unexpected job and you weren't sure how it was going to work out, but something really transformed in you from where you were to where you got to on the other side of that event. And so that's how progress works, both individually as well as collectively. And right now, many people are saying humanity is going through this huge shift. And as is normal in the case of huge shifts, there's going to be many people that are latching more tightly onto the old ways of thinking and understanding. So there's an increase in fundamentalism, and nowadays an increase in conspiracy theories like there never was before, because people find a security in those. Okay, I know what to believe, and now here's a bunch of other people that I can relate to that think the way that I do, so this must be true. And what does that do? It creates a polarization. And it's not hard to see how the world is becoming much more polarized. But one positive side of this is many people are waking up to an understanding there's got to be a better way of going about existing in this planet. There's got to be a better way of us interrelating with not just other people, but with nature and so on. And we're seeking to discover something that we couldn't perceive from our old ways of thinking. And that's only going to occur when enough people come into a relationship with their consciousness with each other, where there's an interplay. And now when you have an interplay of consciousness of several people, there's a possibility for insights to arise that are way more than the sum total of this person's way of thinking and that person's way of thinking. In fact, it's been demonstrated, if you have a group of experts in a field trying to solve a problem, you're going to get better results if you bring someone into that group, perhaps who knows nothing about what they're working on, but ask questions that, the group would say, wait a minute, it's a different perspective, a different way of thinking. And in network theory, there's an idea of something called a weak connector. Like if you're looking for a job and you only ask your connections that you know about, well, they're just going to know the connections they know about. But if someone links you with somebody you don't know in a different area, perhaps even a different field of work, now they've got their whole other batch of connections, and your possibilities of getting a job are way more than if you just stuck to what was familiar. But our tendency is, and I'll do a little visual demonstration, is more of the same is bound to work. So let's say I've never opened this door before, and I'm trying to get out of the room. Come here to help me open this door. And I'm pushing on it. We can push all day, it's not going to open, I have to pull. And I'm sure all of us are guilty of this. I know I am. You're trying to do something and it's not working. And before you realize this is never going to work, you realize, well, I need to do something different. I'm turning the screw the wrong way. This is not going to loosen if I keep turning it this way.
Let me add a little bit here.
Yeah.
Well, so this kind of brings in the uniqueness we were talking about before too. That someone brings something unique. Well, every person that we know really is unique. So if we can really involve people and listen to people and respect people for what they're saying, even though you might say, well, they really don't know very well. That's what he was just saying. Even these brilliant minds needed some other point of view, and then something flows.
So
how about a meditation?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that. So let's do a little meditation. And so Pir Vilayat, again, who was our teacher for many years, would suggest that whenever anyone does a meditation, it's important that you have a purpose for it. Like, what are you looking for? And so I'll use my example of using Google. you get on the search box and you just hit enter. You don't put anything in the search box. What's going to happen? Nothing. You got to tell Google what you're looking for. So if your purpose in meditating is to try to understand something, my practice for years oftentimes is to sit with a question. And I'll just put the question out, but then I'll just keep saying it over and over again, and I get into a receptive state, and I just wait for a little nibble, and then I kind of orient towards that. And a lot of times I'll get an insight that I never could have come up with my old way of thinking. So close your eyes and imagine that you're looking at a book which is current. It's your life story to date. It's got kind of the Cliff Notes version of all the significant events of your life up to today. And now imagine that you're looking ahead and you're just imagining what the future chapters are going to look like, on into many, many years, maybe on into the day of your last breath. What's that going to look like? And chances are it's going to be something that's pretty consistent with the way that things have been. Perhaps you have some wishes you're able to grant that you couldn't do before. Maybe you've retired, or you maybe get to travel, or you maybe get to take up something that you hadn't taken up before, some craft or hobby or whatever. But it's, pretty much fits into a nice story. And now imagine someone comes along from a higher dimension and says, fill in the blank with your name. You know what? You could do that, and this will probably be the way your life goes, what you've got lined up. But we have a special offer today. You can write the rest of this book however you like, within reason. We're not going to make you king of the world or anything, but something that's reasonable but possible, but maybe it's outside the scope of what you'd allow yourself to think that could be possible. And you just allow yourself now to follow some maybe desire that you've had in the past that you kind of push down and go, well, I can't really do that, or I'm not very good at that. But you go, well, this being is telling me I can change what this book of my life is going to look like, and kind of lay out a plan. So what would you like it to look like? Realizing that as you go along and move into that, you can always change it into something else. This is kind of a template for a direction that you might like to go in that maybe is a little bit different than the direction that you've been going in. And maybe it involves a realization that you could learn some things from people that you don't normally associate with, who have ideas very different than yours. But you just imagine yourself interacting with them and listening to them and seeing past the surface judgments that you might have of them, and realizing they're all usually caught up in their own frame of reference with their own story that they're continuing in a certain way. But you could even envision different possibilities for them as some insight comes to them or some experience comes along. And now imagine that as you do this being who's come to you and told you how you can change this story of your life is simultaneously coming to every other being on the earth and telling them the same thing in their language in a way that they can understand. And everybody on the earth is now envisioning something better, not just for themselves, but this would also include, what would you like the world to look like? How would you like the world to be? And you can envision now millions of people beginning to interact with other people who perhaps have different ideas from them, but they're interacting with them with open minds and open hearts And something is catalyzed in this way of interacting. It's like a chain reaction of new possibilities for the world and for humanity. And the same being who came to you with this gift of how you can change your story is now sharing with you the in-process book of life of the world. It's a big book, but it's got the history of the world as it's been up to now. But now collectively, millions and millions of people are contributing to changing what this story is going to be about into the future, opening up a whole new world of possibilities and ways of being, and opening to solutions to problems that have been plaguing humanity for thousands of years. And perhaps there's something called heart math that some of you might be familiar with, that there's little devices that measure when the heart gets into a really healthy rhythm, but they're games that you play to help you with feedback. And one of the ones I recall starts you off in just this black and white world, and as your heart starts to get into rhythm, colors start getting added, and animals start appearing, and birds start singing, and flowers start blossoming. So imagine now, as so many millions of people are transforming not only their own story, but the story of the book of life of the world, the same kind of thing is happening. The world itself is transforming. And that transformation takes place now. And new types of light are now circulating from the transcendent to the manifest, and between all beings in manifestation, between people and each other, between people and animals, between everything in nature, the earth itself. And imagine now that everyone is stepping outside of their box of limitations and are living in a world that has such a greater scope of freedom. And this is a little meditation you could take with you if you like. You could try it every day for a while. You can add on and edit and modify your story. You can contribute towards the editing of the story of life, of the world as well. And perhaps it will carry over into your dreams. And may we each be a channel for the transformation of light in the world and in all the realms.